and welcome to Excel Tips. My name is Neale Blackwood. I'm a CPA, and in this episode we're going to look at some of the Excel features and functions that are worthwhile learning if you're a university student or a university graduate. One thing that you will find when you start working is Excel is the one constant between jobs and also between companies. Companies use different softwares for their accounting packages and reporting packages, but Excel tends to be the one constant across jobs, sectors, companies. So it's a worthwhile skill to learn because it does improve your employability in the long term. So to start off, I wanted to share an example of including structure in your Excel files. Now, Excel files are made up of Excel sheets, and you can use the Excel sheets, or they're also called tabs down the bottom here, to have different parts of the model. Now, what we're looking at here is an example of a budget model. So this is one I created for a budget challenge that an academic put out. And so I thought this was a good example. It does show different sheets being used for different things. And that's part of the structure that you can build into your Excel files. In this case, we've got an instruction sheet. So this tells you how to use the file. It also explains some of the color coding. So I've used different colors for government, military, private, and education. So you can see these green sheets, blue sheets, and if we scroll across, you'll see the orange and then the yellow. We're very visual creatures, so color coding your sheets does make it easier to sort of understand the structure of the file. To change the color of a sheet, it's very easy. Just right-click the sheet and point to the tab color, and then you can select all of the colors. You can also say no color. This one here, this data sheet, that's an example of no color. That's the standard color, basically, of the gray. And I've used some codes here. So G stands for government, so that G_N is government north. So I've used a naming convention for my sheets to make things easier. I've got an index sheet. So if I want to navigate to any of the sheets, I can just go and click there, and that will take me to the sheet. That's called a hyperlink, which you can create in Excel. Here's a little tip. If you follow a hyperlink and want to go back, you can just press the F5 key and then press enter, and that will take you back to where you were. I've got a validation sheet here. I've got some checks to make sure that things are balancing and equaling 100%. So if we have a look in the data, for example, some of these need to equal 100%. So for example, if I delete that government percentage, then I automatically get a validation error, and that's picked up straight away. So highly recommend that you have a validation sheet in your file so that you do pick up if things do go out of balance or aren't as they're supposed to be. This data sheet is the input basically for the model. So the green color are the input cells. And so the different sheets are doing different things. So this is a summary for the total company. Then I've got a summary for government, military, etc. So I've broken down the reports into separate tabs. And also these, each of these tabs represents a segment as well as a region. So the government is a segment and the north is a region. So I've built in the structure to the sheets. And then these formulas here summarize all of those other sheets. So this is an example of how you can sort of split up your file into separate sheets. Again, they're also called tabs, and they're listed down the bottom. So that's structure. So let's have a look at some formulas. So I'll minimize this one. Now, when you're working in Excel, you're going to be working with cells. So each cell can contain a value, a date, or a formula. So when you're using formulas, you need to refer to other cells typically. So for example, if I wanted to double the value in here, I can go equals. I can use my arrow key to select the cell, and then I can go times 2. So the multiplication symbol in Excel is the asterisk, which is above the number 8 on your keyboard, but it's also on the keypad on the right-hand side of a full-size keyboard. So I do recommend that you do use a full-size keyboard when you're working in Excel. It just makes things easier. Some laptops, for example, do not have the numeric keypad on the right-hand side. And so one thing to be aware of in Excel is nothing really happens until you hit enter, and that's when the calculation is actually done. So it's sort of in limbo until you hit enter. So there's an example of a formula where we've multiplied a number and in this case doubled it. You need to start your formulas with an equal sign, so that's required. How you create the cell reference is up to you. I showed you using the arrow key. You can also use the mouse to click on it and create it. The other way is you can type it. I'm not a big fan of typing cell references because you can make mistakes fairly easily. But you can do it, and you don't need to put it in capitals. You can put a lowercase b. So when you're referring to a cell, it's the column reference followed by the row number. So B2 refers to this cell here. The formula I've created is in C2, but it's referring to B2, and that's just doubling it. Now, here's a little tip. You don't have to key in the equal sign. What you can do is start the formula with the plus sign. Now, the reason I do that is because I've got a full-size keyboard and the plus sign is a nice big key on the far right of it. I can then use my arrow key times 2 and to do that. And you'll notice that Excel puts the equal sign in for me. So it does the work. So the equal sign is sort of tucked away in the middle of the keyboard, so it's not that easy to access. Okay, so that's cells. You can also refer to ranges. Now, when you refer to a range, so I've got a formula here called the sum function. And when you refer to a range, you have the top left cell followed by the colon and then the bottom right cell. That defines the parameters of the range, so the top left cell and the bottom right cell, and you put the colon between them. Again, you can type that, but it's much easier to let Excel do the work. Now with the sum function, if I delete this, the sum function has its own icon. Now I've put it on this is called the quick access toolbar. That's the sum function icon there. On the right of the home ribbon, there is also the AutoSum icon, which you can use to insert the sum function. So let's use this, which is the insert sum. You'll notice Excel does all of the work for you. It's typed in the function name, it's put the opening bracket, it's put the range, and it's put the closing bracket. That's really easy. I'll show you the manual way to do it. So you can type in sum. I press the tab key to put the opening bracket there for you. Then you can use the mouse to select the range. And that's what I recommend doing when you are creating ranges, because it's so much easier to select the range with the mouse than it is to type it in with the keyboard. And then you can put a bracket on the end there. The brackets are also called parentheses. I tend to use the term brackets. And there we go. So that's the sum function. Now, one thing you will find when you start referring to cells is that you need to create a formula that you can copy down and across. I'll give you an example here, which we'll look at later. But let's say we wanted to multiply this amount here by GST. What I'm going to do is put the GST amount in a cell, and we're going to go plus that times, and I want to refer to G1. So there's 10%, and if I copy this down, drag the fill handle, you'll notice that it doesn't really work, because when I look at the next cell, it's got G2, because it's what's called a relative reference. So it changes relative to where you copy the formula to. I don't want the G1 to change, so let's delete those. So what I'm going to do is click here and press my F4 function key. When I press it once, I get a $sign in front of the G and a $sign in front of the 1. And that stops the reference from changing. So if I press enter now and then use my fill handle to drag that down, it works as expected. The G1, it won't change no matter where I copy it. So because the dollar sign fixes whatever it's in front of, basically. It stops the G from changing and it stops the 1 from changing. Now, you can press the F4 key more than once. So when I press it again, let's start from scratch actually. So I'm going to go back to here. So that's what it's normally, that's called the relative reference. So that's the one that changes. They both can change. If I press F4, which is what I did, I press it once, and that creates what's called a fixed or an absolute reference. So that doesn't change. Press it one more time. And now I'm only fixing the row number. This is called a mixed reference because it's only fixing one of the references. I press the F4 key one more time. And now the dollar sign is in front of the G. Now you can type the dollar sign in yourself, but obviously you need to use the Shift key and the number 4. In general, I use the F4 function key. That actually helps you remember which key to use because the number 4 has the dollar sign on it. So you can use the F4 function key to change the reference. If I press it again, then the dollar signs go away. So it's the same sequence. So I'll take you through. So press it once, press it twice, press it 3 times, and press it 4 times. That's a consistent sequence of where the dollar signs go. So you get used to how many times you need to press the F4 function key. Now, the first rule of Excel formulas is that you don't key in a value if that value could change. Now, you might not think GST is going to change, but it could. It's a possibility. That's why I typed in the 10% here, and then I referred to that, because that 10% could change. The problem you'll face is if you could go in here and type in 0.1, which is 10%, and copy that down. The problem you'll then face is if GST does change, then you'll need to go and track down where you've typed in your 0.1 to amend it. So it's much easier to refer to the G1, fix it, copy it down, and now you only need to change one cell, and all of these other formulas will automatically update because they're referring to G1. So if it does go up, say 12.5%, then you can update it in one spot. So that's the first rule of formulas. When you're creating a formula, don't key in a value if that value could change. You need to put it in a cell and give that cell a label, and you can even change the color. So you might want to make that yellow, for example, and then that's the input cell, so the GST percentage. And then you can refer to that throughout the file using that cell in this sheet. Okay, so let's go back and have a look at the function basics. So in the article, I've given you a list of lots of functions that are worthwhile learning. Excel has hundreds of functions, but there's probably only a 20 or 30 you need to master to become really good at Excel. And some of them are straightforward. So the sum function, which is by far the most popular and most used function in Excel, is easy to use because it's got its own icon. It's even got a keyboard shortcut. If you hold the Alt key down and press the equal sign, so I'll show you that. So hold the Alt key down, press the equals, and that will insert the sum function as well. There are a number of other functions that are worthwhile learning, which are in that table. I'll show you some of the basic ones. So this drop down under AutoSum, so I'm in the top right hand corner of the home ribbon. If you click the drop down, there's actually average. So that's a function. Count is a function, it counts numbers. There's a function called max, which is the maximum, and a function called min, which shows you the minimum. So let's try that. So that puts the min function in, and it finds the minimum from that range, which is the very bottom one, 204,662. All of those functions work in the same way as the sum function. So once you've learnt the sum function, you can then use things like average, max, min as well. So they're the sort of the basic functions to start out with. The table that I mentioned in the online article has other functions that are worthwhile mastering. Formatting. So in Excel, it's up to you to format your reports and your data so that it's easy for you and also anyone else to use. I thought I'd give you this example here where on the left-hand side, there's no formatting applied. So it just uses what's called the general up in, you can see up in the middle of the home ribbon here. So this general is really no format. So you can see that's an interest rate there, but that's just shown as 0.05. So when you're building your spreadsheets, the standard cell format is general, so it doesn't apply any formats. You'll find that if you enter a date into a cell, that Excel will automatically format that date, but apart from that, it's pretty much left as general. Now, on the right hand side, we've got some formatting. So what I've done is I've put a color coding here for inputting, and it's using a different color. I've also thrown in a legend. So the orange cells are inputs, the gray cells are formulas. So theoretically, you only change the orange cells, you don't touch the gray cells, which are doing calculations. So this formula here is a very basic one. You can see I've used the plus sign. It's just dividing the interest rate by 12, and then this one here is just multiplying the number of years by 12. When you're using the function that's here, which is the monthly repayment function, which is PMT, short for payment, you need to use the period that you are working with, which in this case is months. So this is calculating the monthly repayment on borrowing $400,000 at 5% over 20 years. So there's a function in Excel that actually calculates the repayments on a loan. So what you're trying to do is to make it easier for yourself and anyone else to use the file. And using formats consistently throughout the file is part of that. Now, one feature that makes that a lot easier is this little section here, which is called styles. So if you click down, there's a number of styles that are built in. You can make your own styles as well. So styles are formats that you can apply throughout the file. And it just, again, keeps the formatting consistent. So in one file, you should probably have a consistent input color. So that's the goal. When you are using color, be careful and don't overuse color. Try and use it for effect rather than overuse color in Excel. Just be aware of color blindness. It is a male thing, so about 1 in 12 men has some form of color blindness. Red-green color blindness is the most common. Consider using also pastel type colors rather than bright colors. That can be useful. Use the comma format. This is the comma format here, which uses the comma to separate the thousands. Don't overuse the dollar sign. So rather than, as an example here, instead of putting the dollar sign on all of the values in a column, maybe just add the dollar sign to the heading so that it doesn't overuse the dollar sign. It just adds an extra character to your reports, and you want to try and reduce the number of characters if possible. Okay, so talking about formats, Excel has a feature that's called conditional formats. And what it allows you to do, it's got quite a number of different features. As an example, it allows you to put color-coded icons into a cell. So in this case, we're looking at comparing actuals to budget. And this is sales. So if actuals are higher than budget, that's a good thing. If they're below budget, that's a bad thing. And so we've got that if it's a negative, it's an X. If it's a positive, it's a tick. Overall, we're above budget. And so we're very visual creatures, as I mentioned, so using ticks and crosses can be very useful in your reports. So conditional formats allow you to do that automatically. So for example, if I change, let's say, let's make this 255, then as you can see, everything changes to X because the widgets were sort of saving us. So you can see it's automatic. You don't need to do anything. It's and you can have background colors. Just be aware, as I mentioned, color blindness. So don't use just colors necessarily. If you can use some icons as well. So obviously these are green ticks, but it's also a tick. So red-green color blindness does tend to be the most common. And so if you can use an icon as well, it just makes it easier for everybody to be able to read your reports. Now, charts, it's worthwhile learning how to create charts. It can be quite easy. You select the range, you click on Insert. If you look at recommended charts, that's a good way to start. As you can see, I've got a line chart is the recommended one. So if I just click OK, you can see how easy it is to create the chart. And again, being visual creatures, charts can summarize numbers and make it really easy to see. In this case, our sales are really up and down, literally. Printing. Now, printing is a little bit different in Excel compared to something like Word or PowerPoint or Outlook. So we've got this huge grid. So if I go down to the bottom here, we can see I've got over 1 million rows possible. And if I go over to the right, I've got over 16,000 columns. So it's a huge grid that you've got access to. If you put an entry in a cell, Excel is going to try and print that. Okay, so no matter where you put the value, Excel will want to try and print that. So that's why you've got to get used to using what's called the print area. So under page layout, all of your print settings are pretty much here. And if you have a look at the print area drop down, there's an option for set print area. And by doing that, you're telling Excel the range that you want to print. So for example, you might have some workings at the bottom that you don't want to print out. Or they could be off to the right. So you can set a print area. So for example, I can select that range and then tell it that that's the print area. And in doing so, that's the only part of the sheet that would print. In Excel, because this grid is so large, it is possible to, when you hit print, to actually print out a lot of pages that you don't realize. So it's always a good idea to go under File and then Print, just to check out the layout that you're going to see when you print it. Now, always look at the bottom here, because this tells you how many pages you're going to print. If you've got a number here that's a lot larger than you're expecting, that's when you need to go and maybe look at the layout there. A couple of things you can change. So it's very common to want to print something sideways. So that's under orientation. So that's instead of portrait, you could print landscape, and that sort of puts the report sideways. And when you do that, you might want to change what are called the titles. So print titles are, so these are the rows you want to repeat at the top. You can define, and then the columns you want to repeat at the left. So this means if your report is fairly wide and goes over multiple pages, all of the headings will print correctly. And so they're called titles, and that's in the print, under print titles here. Okay, so that's a lot of the basics of Excel and the things to learn and the things to realize. I thought I'd finish with a couple of bonuses. So here's another example of, I'll just get rid of those, and we'll come and do that GST calculation again, and I'll show you something slightly different. What we have here is a table. In Excel, if you've got a table of data, it can be worthwhile using Format as Table. So back on the Home ribbon, Format as Table, I'm going to click on that as long as you're anywhere in the table. You can select a color. So let's go green. It defines the area. Now, when you've got a table, make sure you don't have blank rows or blank columns in it, because otherwise you'll have to manually select this range. Your table probably should have headers, so this should be ticked, and click OK. And that's an example of a formatted table. Now, it's got a lot of advantages. So here's one. Let's say I wanted to add that GST column again. Okay, now I'm going to create a formula that refers to the amount. And notice that it actually puts the word amount there times our G1, and I'm going to fix the G1. Now I can press enter and it will automatically copy the formula down for me. Here we go. There we go. So that is one of the advantages of using what's called a formatted table. It automatically copies formulas down columns. If I put another date down the bottom here, let's say I create another invoice. Okay, it automatically extends the table to include the invoice, and you'll notice that it did the calculation as well. So formatted tables are really, really powerful. I've done an article on just formatted tables, so check out the INTHEBLACK website and you can have a look at that. Now, something that follows on from formatted tables, it's called pivot table. So I'm going to click inside this, click the insert ribbon, and then click the pivot table icon on the far left. By the way, the formatted table has a name. It's table 1 at the moment. You can change that to a more descriptive name, but I'm just going to run with that. Click OK. And a pivot table allows you to drag and drop. So let's say I drag the state to the row and the amount to the values, and there we go. I've got a summary of that table by state. And so that's adding up the values for me. So pivot tables are really, really powerful when working with data. I didn't need to put any formulas in there. It's done it automatically for me. So again, check out the INTHEBLACK website. I've done some articles on pivot tables. I thought I'd finish off with, it's a data importation feature. I'm not going to take you through it because I have done a lot of articles on it. It's under data and it's on the left-hand side. And basically you can import data from almost any system or any file using what's called Power Query. It's called Get and Transform Data in this section. This, by the way, is also part of Power BI, which you may have heard of. Power BI is Microsoft's dashboarding package, and any skills you learn in Excel in this Power Query can also be applied directly to Power BI. And lastly, I thought I'd finish off with the new calculation feature in Excel that is called dynamic arrays. So there's some functions that they've added, but I wanted to show you just a brief example here. So let's say I wanted to get a unique list of all of the states in our table here. So I wanted to show you an example of a dynamic array. So there's a function called unique. So equals unique. I'm just hitting my tab key and I'm going to select this column, and you'll see that instead of having the range reference, it's got table 1 square bracket state and then close the square bracket. That's how you refer to a column in a formatted table. It's a special layout called a structured reference. So when I press enter, all of my states are listed, all of the unique states. So that's an example of a dynamic array. It changes, it's dynamic. So as if I make extra entries, I think that's pretty much all of the states and territories. So maybe I'm going to add ACT. So if I change this bottom one to ACT, you'll see that automatically appears at the bottom. So that's the dynamic nature of what are called dynamic arrays. The other thing is that formula is only in the first cell. I have done a detailed listing of 3 articles on dynamic arrays when they first sort of arrived. So you can check out the INTHEBLACK website for information on that. And that applies to a lot of the topics that I've covered today. So on the INTHEBLACK website, if you click the menu and then click Technical Skills, you'll find lots of Excel content listed, and you can scroll through or you can also search. And most of the Excel articles have a companion video, and some of them have example files as well. Okay, so if you are a uni student or a recent graduate, best of luck for your job hunting. And one thing you'll find is that Excel is an important part of most jobs. Thanks for watching.